Hey everybody, welcome back. In today's video, I want to have a look at Cardano. But before I do, I first want to thank today's sponsor, FairDesk. Now, FairDesk is an exchange, and if you're interested, you can click the link in the description for a 5% deposit bonus. And with no KYC required, you can start trading straight away. Now, getting straight back to Cardano, we can see this is a lovely chart. And to be honest with you, I love coming to Cardano because it makes my job, well, my hobby as an analyst, like so much easier. It makes me feel like I'm a much better analyst than I actually am, because Cardano seems to, like, everything that I've said about Cardano has come true so far, and we'll get into that later. But the reason it has is because I've basically predicted what happened last cycle, and so far Cardano has done exactly what it did since last cycle, with a couple slight variations, but these variations aren't like anything significant. They're like minuscule. It's like a few percentage ranges, or we didn't come back to a certain support, or we broke through a resistance at a time earlier or later than we previously did. Like Cardano, again, I know I sound so big-headed, but it's an interesting one for me to come to, because like the data that it provides is very, it's nice and it's easy. There's not too much work or mental gymnastics that I have to do to sort of find resistance levels or support levels, or, you know, what happened last cycle, why is it so different this cycle. Cardano has just played out like it has, and we'll get into why it has now. But before I do, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. First of all, the chart that we're using, it's a logarithmic chart, so it means that basically for each grid movements, we're moving up percentage equally instead of like dollar amounts equally. So on a normal chart, we might move up 10 cents a grid. On this chart, we're moving up 5 cents a grid, 5%, sorry, a grid, or something like that. I don't know what it actually is, but as you can see, this makes it scale much faster on the y-axis, which is where the dollar amount is. Secondly, as well, I just want to point out these two lines are where the Bitcoin halvings are supposed to have happened. Well, this one did happen on the 11th of May 2020. We don't know, of course, yet the 2024 one yet, because it hasn't happened, but it's due to be late April, and the current sort of guesstimate is the 24th of April. So that's where I have this one, just to sort of rule out any confusion that we might have during this video. Just make sure we're all on the same page and know what we're looking at. Next of all, I want to show you sort of these lines here, and this is just basically the trend that Cardano went in after its peak in the bull run. You know, after its high that it put in, its all-time high for that time. These orange lines show where it followed the trend until it basically didn't follow the trend. And same here. This white line is also just another follow the trend, but it's the one after we broke out of the previous trend that the orange lines were sort of showcasing. So we have we follow this orange trend line, or trend lines, we break out, we follow this white trend line, and then we come up to the halving. And last of all, this blue line, it's not too important. It's just, well, it is important. It basically shows off where our bull run happened for Cardano last cycle at this sort of 23 cent level. It also lines up perfectly with 2021, where Cardano's price exploded. I mean, we went from 23 cents to $2.50 in 5 months, and it all sort of kicked off here. So it was at this level that Cardano exploded, and it's also where we've come back and bounced multiple times this cycle. And I mean, our first one was beginning of this year with the FTX, and then we've bounced off it a few times, and Cardano has held this support. So it might play an important role later on. It might change the outcome of Cardano this cycle slightly, but ultimately I think it will follow a similar pattern. And that pattern is, I think we're going to have a rally and then a dump just before the Bitcoin halving, like we've seen it do last cycle. I think we're due on here. And I think this pump here is ultimately the same as this pump that has just happened now. I know what you're saying. If you look at these pumps, this current pump, it's been 35%. If we take a look at this last pump, it's been 120%. I know you're going, well, that's not right. I mean, they're not really accurate at all. And I would agree with you in the sense that no, those percentage moves are not accurate at all, or they're not comparable at all. However, if, and this is where it gets interesting, if you take the previous high, or the previous local high, the high that we broke out from and put in after we broke out of this orange range, if we take the peak of that and measure it to the peak of the high before the ultimate capitulation, where we sort of put in our lows for the cycle for Cardano, we can see it's 30%. If we do the same for our current price and we go down 30%, it puts us exactly where we are now. Literally 30%, bang on, puts us to the local high that Cardano recently put in a few days ago. Now, sorry, this is like off here, but that will only move it a percentage or two. It basically rules out or plays out the exact same as it did last time. Literally the exact same. So again, it's kind of like, do you want to measure it? Well, actually, also, I'll show you this. We went down 70% here from this high to this low. We went down only 46% from this high to this low. So again, it's the same moves, just not as drastic. And then, of course, so we have a much stronger rally up. But here we have a much weaker rally up. We only go up, 30, 40%, whatever it is, compared to the, compared to the 50% down. So again, it's a different cycle. Market conditions are different. And also, Cardano's market cap has grown. So it's much harder to move the price of a crypto that has, 10x in market cap, probably much more. I don't actually know the figures on that, but I assume Cardano's market cap has skyrocketed since these times here, even after its first bull run. Like, it's much greater now. So it takes a lot more to move the price in the same amount on its USD wise. And also its percentage move. So we see this. So even though it's playing out the exact same way, the same pattern, it's just not as volatile because the market cap is bigger and there's more liquidity compared to its previous cycle. Now there's still very little liquidity in the altcoin market, but compared to what it was 4 years ago, Cardano is doing much better than it was. Obviously, this is evident, but very interesting. If we also have a look at sort of how far we can expect to drop, we saw last cycle we dropped 74%, but also we saw from here to here we dropped a similar range, about 70%. So if we take this info and we go, okay, we dropped 46% from here to here. If we then take a 45-46% drop here, it puts us just below the 20-cent mark, which I believe is a very fair range for Cardano to drop into, the sort of 18-19 cent range. And I think it's very possible. I mean, we're currently at 32, but not too long ago we were at 22, sort of 24 range, sorry. Yeah, 23, sort of 24 cent range. I mean, is it difficult for Cardano to return to these levels? No, I think it will. Is it difficult for Cardano to break below this support? Yes, I think it is difficult because it's bounced off this support multiple times, whereas before we didn't really have a support that prevailed through the bear market. Like we can see here, it was ultimately different lows all the time. You could argue that maybe, this here was your low and you bounced off it once. Maybe this was technically a bounce and then you broke down below. You could argue that. It's not too cut and dry for me, so I wouldn't really use it as information, so it's hard to say, but we do ultimately put in new lows here, and there was strong supports at these points. Like Cardano went back to its lowest ever here. It basically went down to the same price as it did here, where it was below 2 cents. I can see Cardano going down to its lowest where it was this cycle, which was here, but we could put in a low. Again, I think this is one of those pieces of information that will vary from cycle to cycle. Macro-wise, it will play out basically the same. If you look at it from a distance, like we have a pump, a little dip, a pump, we have a pump, a little dip, and a pump. Then we come all the way down on this white line. Then we have a pump, then we have a pump, and then we have one final dip. We have one final dip. Whether this dip goes below the blue line, whether it bounces off it again, who knows? But I do think that it will basically play out the same way. And once we've had this final sort of sell-off, that will be it, ultimately, for Cardano's poor price action, and I would be willing to say that we're not in a bear market then, but I would also not say that we're not in a bull market. I think 2025 is sort of when we can expect prices to go parabolic again. So yeah, again, that's kind of what I'm looking at and pricing in personally. But again, this is where that sort of I'm bullish after March sort of time frame comes in. We can see that it's literally 2 months before the halving. We can see here April, late April, 2 months before the halving, puts us at a late February sort of time. So like, again, very easy for us to drop down to this level again before the end of February. Now, looking at Cardano on its Bitcoin pair, I mean, if you've watched any of our previous Cardano videos, you will have seen this chart, but it still needs a bit of fine tuning, but it gets the point across. It basically shows where Cardano spends, how much time Cardano spends below this orange line. This orange line is the 3,250 Satoshi mark, and this is where I would say above this line is where you're selling Cardano for a good price usually, and this will translate onto your USD pair as well. If you're moving Cardano from Cardano to USD at these points, you're probably making a lot of money. We can see this is basically like mid 2021 and the later half of 2021 when Cardano put in its all-time highs. So it translates very well. It sort of shows you where it, Cardano does well, and we see that it basically spends most of its time during the cycle below this line. And now a lot of people could argue, well, this 2000 level, that would be where I would put my deep value for Cardano, or this is where the bull run starts for me. I would agree. I would say lower on is where you'll see Cardano start to do well, and this is true. Like if we look at where it first hit 2000, that was basically February of 2021, the beginning of the year of the bull market, where Cardano went parabolic, and we saw it 10x basically in this time frame, and it represents that on its Bitcoin pair. We can see currently at the moment we're about 2/3 through this sort of 3-year below 3,000 level, and it seems to be playing out fairly similarly again. It's a bit different on its Bitcoin pair. Like we haven't had this sort of bounce off this deep value range that I've spoken about, and we haven't come down deep into it either. We've had a much slower decline, a much more boring play basically, where Cardano is just steadily put in lower highs, lower lows on its Bitcoin pair, and this is to be expected, but we've had basically no reversion at all. It's just been down basically, whereas compared to the previous year, sorry, that's very rough, but whereas compared to the previous cycle, we had a rally where we broke this trend, we had a pump, and then we broke this pump and crashed to here, and then we did nothing in this deep value range, and then we had a pump, and then we broke that pump, and it was a bit all over the place over the course of 3 years. It did a lot, whereas these last 2 years, Cardano has basically just gone down. Very boring. So very good for the bears if you're somehow able to find an exchange that will let you short this pair. Yeah, it's different on its Bitcoin pair, but its USD pair is the same. What do I expect to sort of happen in the short term and the long term? I do kind of think that maybe this deep value range is now out of the question this cycle. If we have a look where, the previous halving happened, it was May 10th, wasn't it? I think May 10th. So we can see that it literally rallied a tiny bit beforehand, and then it had a short-term rally of about 2 months, give or take, afterwards on its Bitcoin pair, and then returned to this deep value level. If we want to now say that, hey, Cardano, this is where it's putting its lows, and we're coming up to the halving in a few months, maybe we get a little pump into the next few, like maybe we see something like this happen, a drop, and then we see our Bitcoin. I mean, we have to remember that basically the Bitcoin halving is still 5 months away, 6 months away. It's half a year away. if we go to sort of where Cardano was half a year ago, is at these levels, and it was basically just staying at these levels for a while. We have been at this level for a while, this sort of red line level, and we haven't really moved. We haven't gone much lower, and we haven't gone much higher. We've basically oscillated. I think we could see something similar play out, where altcoins finally start to catch up to their Bitcoin pairs and they stop putting in lower lows. Maybe we have a big sell-off at one point or something. There can always be a sort of black swan where something changes from the previous cycle, and we've seen Cardano has been different from its previous cycle on its Bitcoin pair, but I ultimately think we will just move like this for the next few months, and then we might have a short-term rally after the halving, which is expected. A lot of alts sort of recover a bit on their BTC pairs, but then they sort of drop down again when BTC sort of rallies us into the bull run, and then the altcoins explode and we have our altcoin 10x, 20x moves. So yeah, sort of next few months I can see Cardano doing nothing on its Bitcoin pair, and then sort of around the halving time, after the halving time, we have a small Bitcoin pump. And then if we have a look at what Cardano did after the halving, you know, it obviously pumped and then we had a little pullback. We can see Cardano pumped here and then we had a pullback and then our Bitcoin rally. So basically the same on both charts. Once the halving happens, I expect a pump and then a pullback and then our bull run. And that should be some sort of time in early 2025 in my opinion. Like early 2025 is when I can expect it. Maybe we start rallying up into that beforehand. I do expect 2024 to ultimately be a good year for crypto, but I think we're going to get our best prices for 2024 at the beginning of 2024, and ultimately even better prices at the end of 2023. So that's what I'm personally holding out for. And that kind of basically says everything I want to say. I'm trying to think if I've missed anything. We've had this bounce off this line. Again, this line could sort of be the only variation from the previous cycle, but you could make an argument saying, well, this line was our previous blue line, the previous cycle, and it basically played out the same. Like we had a bounce, and then a drop below. We had a bounce, and then maybe an extra bounce and a drop below. You know, it's kind of up to you. You have to make that decision. I can't make these decisions for you. I just like to give you all the information that you can have and that I would have. So yeah, if you like the video, leave a like, consider subscribing so you can see my videos as soon as they come out, because of course, you know, with these sort of cryptos and stuff, it's obviously time sensitive. Thanks again for watching, guys. Take care and peace.